stream on those platforms. Okay.
And Andy, excuse me, Gregory, you'll cue me when it's time for me to start with opening comments.
I will.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
I'll be right back.
Sure everything is.
So is everyone doing well? Also, I haven't seen you for a while.
I took a quick trip to Egypt, so that's the reason I missed the last EFA meeting.
Mhm.
My brother, I have two brothers, and one of my brothers is not doing well, physically. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer back in March, and just getting really rough. So although we're planning to take the boys and go visit the family in December, but I thought just to squeeze a week and went, spend a week with him.
Good, I'm glad you could do that.
Yeah, so I was kind of nervous traveling during the COVID. I didn't fly internationally for a long
Sure.
while now, yeah. But it went really well. Yeah, they just to give you the hint, the host on the airplane, they wake you up to make sure that you're wearing the mask. I was like, I finally dozed. Come on. That's good. Give you also that peace of mind that somebody is looking after you, even when you're asleep.
Right. And Sid, I saw you give a thumbs up, so things are going well there.
Yes, sir.
Good. More clients than you can handle?
Well, I try to keep balance and space those out, but yeah, we have work to do always.
Yeah.
We just finished the film. It premiered Wednesday, Mark Albertson's film.
Which one?
Yeah, brilliant job. It's the fastest film he's ever turned around, and now he'll get back to the one that we've co-sponsored.
Right. So the one about the Everglades and the...
No, Okefenokee.
Okefenokee, yeah.
Yeah.
And
But it's entitled Sacred Waters, the Okefenokee in Peril. It's got some religious dynamics, researchers, climatologists. Very well done. Very well done. And it's on YouTube now.
Cool.
It was
Awesome.
on Vimeo.
Okay.
But yes, Sacred Waters, the Okefenokee in Peril.
Yeah. By the way, while I've got you two ladies on, who is the chair of WIN right now?
So right now, I think it's Francis, Ellen Francis.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that would be the contact, the contact point. But I could be also serving you sort of like a second contact. Yeah.
Okay. I am chair of a group here at Brandon Wild that we put on monthly programs, and I want WIN to do a program in December, and I kind of thought it would be wise to let you all know about it before I had it scheduled. Well,
December is very busy time for everybody, but I'm not sure. Maybe COVID logistics is different.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell me a little bit about that program, or we're getting close to the time?
We're getting close to time. I'll do it later.
Sure.
The one sweetener is it comes with a $500 donation to WIN.
Oh, yeah. Got lots of gourmet treats with that.
Yeah. So Sid, you're going to introduce us each as it's time for us to speak, not all together, right?
Correct. You suggested that. That's a great idea.
Yeah, okay.
So Sid, what do you do? And I'm so sorry, I'm asking, out of ignorance.
Sid?
I'm sorry,
Sid,
was that a...
I said, what do you do? And as I said, I'm sorry, I do not.
No umbrage taken. I am an ordained Presbyterian minister, but I'm a senior partner in a psychotherapy practice. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist with the state, and one of the co-founders of the Progressive Religious Coalition. And so I'm really a full-time, most folks see me as a secular therapist, actually. But I do have some.
Did you speak in the temple on the Was it the annual event about Gandhi? Were you among?
Yes,
Okay, so that's
Yeah.
what I met you, or that's what I've seen. with you.
right,
Okay.
correct.
Like
Thank
I
you.
recognize your voice really more than anything.
Well, thank you. Do a lot of interfaith work as our PRC does, and well, I think so much of the Islamic society. I really do.
Yeah. Okay. Very
Yeah.
good.
Sid, it is time to start.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. You have tuned in virtually to the third program in a series named Going from I to We. Our panel discussion tonight is entitled E Pluribus Unum, From Many One. These programs are sponsored by the Progressive Religious Coalition of Augusta. In existence since 2004, the PRC seeks to call attention to societal needs and common good affairs, culling from varied religious traditions and spiritual ones as well. We petition for such through various means of advocacy. We are known by many for sponsoring the annual Why Dr. King Still Matters interfaith worship service, a wonderfully integrated worship experience with keynotes of national, if not international renown. My name is Sid Gates, and I'm Vice President for the PRC, and I will serve as the moderator for our event tonight. We will have 20-minute apiece presentations, followed by a question and answer session for approximately 30 minutes. Many thanks to Bishop Gregory Godsey of the Old Catholic Order, who is serving as our host tonight and knows and does all things media-wise for the PRC. We are up against the World Series tonight. Go Braves. But I assure you, as one who has a vested interest in watching the series, with all the pregame hoopla, you will not miss much action. And we do very much appreciate your commitment to being with us tonight. And so I'm going to throw out the first pitch tonight to Dr. Andy Reese, who is the president of the Progressive Religious Coalition of Augusta. Dr. Reese, as each of our presenters, has an incredible resume of academic and civic involvements. He has been the driving force to stage these Going from I to We programs. Dr. Reese was conferred a PhD from the University of Missouri and did postdoctoral work at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland and also at Mount Sinai Medical School in New York City. He joined the faculty of then MCG in 1975, and he is now Professor Emeritus of Immunology at the Medical College. He is an author. Dr. Reese has served as the Congregational President of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Augusta and past President of the Augusta Players Community Theater. He is a founding member of the Interfaith Fellowship of Augusta, and his lifelong studies in history and philosophy have led him to publicly presenting on matters pertaining to the history of the Declaration of Independence, the Revolutionary War in the South, and the U.S. Constitution. Dr. Reese, thank you for your efforts to be with us tonight in a presenter capacity, and we look forward to your words for us tonight.
Thanks, Sid. I'm going to start this panel discussion. My section will be to look at the founding documents for our country, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And I'm going to be talking about the influences on how those were written. I'm going to do it by a PowerPoint presentation, so I'm going to bring that up now. And as most of you know, the Enlightenment ideas were critical in the writing of our founding documents. And so that's basically what I'm going to be talking about. Any government has to answer several questions. Who gets a voice in civic affairs, and are all voices equally weighted? As a society, how do we determine the allocation of scarce resources? How do we evaluate the contributions of our citizens, and how do we distribute commensurate rewards? As we will see, there are two different strains of Enlightenment thought as to how they answer these questions. Moderate Enlightenment thinkers, which we'll just call the moderates, focused on order and community. The radical Enlightenment thinkers were more about individual rights. Okay. Both thought one could use reason and the scientific method to discover objective facts. In addition, just to make things more complicated, there were counter-Enlightenment forces, mainly church officials and royalty, who didn't accept the basic Enlightenment ideas. Our country is perhaps the most diverse population of any major country in the world. Because of this, we're held together by ideas rather than by ethnicity, religion, or history, as is the case for most other countries. These ideas that hold us together are expressed in our founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution. The Declaration can be seen as an expression of our highest ideals and aspirations as a people. The Constitution is the practical document about how to achieve those ideals while answering those basic questions with which all governments must deal. As we shall see, the major problem in interpreting these two documents is that they reflect two different strains of Enlightenment thought that are sometimes contradictory. So let's talk about the Declaration of Independence. Many of us have had to memorize the first part of the Declaration, at least, but just to remind you, so we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Jefferson later said that his goal was not to come up with new ideas, but to express existing thought in a compelling and convincing manner. And if you think about it, that had to be true. If he was calling these ideas self-evident, they had to be ones that had been around and people had been talking about, whatever. The things that are in red here and later on are ideas that we're going to be exploring their background with Enlightenment thinkers. The goals of the Constitution are stated in its preamble, and many of us have memorized that at one time or another. So we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. The question then and throughout our history is who is included in all and we. So what were the origins of these things that I just showed you in red? Well, first of all, we know that the ideas were first expressed and debated extensively by Enlightenment thinkers. The Enlightenment, which has fuzzy beginnings and endings, but say roughly between 1640 and 1780, was initiated largely by the invention of science by Copernicus, Galileo, Newton, and Bacon. Their discoveries started to free people's thinkings from just the confines of religion and the Bible. Francis Bacon, in fact, defined the scientific method in 1620. There was general agreement among all of the Enlightenment thinkers that truth or objective fact could be discovered by the application of deductive reasoning to empirical observations. In other words, using science. The moderates thought science just revealed the wonders of God's creation. So let's look at the common basic idea that all of these thinkers shared. And it started with thinking about the state of humanity in what they described as a state of nature. Thomas Hobbes in Leviathan famously said that in a state of nature, human life would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. In the absence of political order and law, everyone would have unlimited natural freedoms, including the right to all things, and thus freedom to plunder and rape and murder. There would be endless war of all against all. To avoid this, free men contract with each other to establish political community, civil society, through a social contract in which they all gain security in return for subjecting themselves to the rule of law. This is the social contract. The controversy here was and still is over who gets to establish those laws. John Locke lived 1632 to 1704. More than any other Enlightenment philosopher, set out the basics necessary for what was to become a democratic revolution. He said government was a human construct, therefore imperfect and in need of continual refinement. So liberal government must be based on natural rights and the consent of the governed, in other words, the social contract. It also required free intellectual, religious, and scientific inquiry, equal justice under the law, universal education designed to nourish individual capacity rather than mass servitude. And so civil society was developed largely to protect property. However, some natural rights were so fundamental that they couldn't be forfeited. That is, they were unalienable. Rights like your life. David Hume, born just 7 years after Locke, but he was heavily influenced by Locke's writings. His early essay of Superstition and Religion laid the foundation for nearly all secular thinking about the history of religion. In his book, An Inquiry into Human Understanding, he argued that humans are governed mostly by emotions and not by reason, which is what most of the previous philosophers had been basing their work on. The reason can sometimes veto or modify actions suggested by our emotions, but more often we look for reason to justify our emotion-based impulses. And this is something that has been proven by science again and again over the past 50 years. Therefore, governments and the laws they pass cannot be made assuming that people will act rationally. They don't. So I've mentioned that there were two strains of Enlightenment thought. The moderates included names that you would recognize like Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, Montesquieu, John Adams, and Hamilton. Radicals, French names you may not be as familiar with, Diderot, de Holbach, Condorcet, but then Franklin, Pierce, and Paine, Franklin, and Jefferson. That's Thomas Paine. Excuse me. Moderates thought it was incumbent on the educated class of society, like them, to lead society for the benefit of and on behalf of all the people. They thought the problems of government were too complicated for common people to understand. They rejected any form of democratic government. They feared the uneducated masses could be too easily manipulated by potential tyrants, that is, mob rule. And that was the thought of the ancient Greeks 2,000 years before also. This ruling aristocracy would devise a constitution that would secure citizens' personal safety and property rights and prevent the abuses of power from the monarch or other executive. Moderates advocated sustaining the church's role in government and in calculating and upholding a societal morality. The radicals, on the other hand, believed that all people have the capacity for reason to determine their own best interests. They recognized everyone tries to make their future better, but to accomplish this, they had to have enough basic education to eradicate prejudices, ignorance, and mistaken traditional views. They had to have some control and influence over the conditions of their society, so citizens should be able to choose their own representatives to advocate their individual interests. They insisted on a firm separation of the church and all faith-based endeavors from civic society. The lessons of history and their own experience taught them that when religion becomes allied with the state, it becomes another form of tyranny. Only by maintaining its independence from the state could religion be the true conscience of the state. So let's think about these ideas a little bit more. The Declaration starts with the idea of unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And these are pure radical ideas. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, etc., is the social contract part. It's a soaring vision of justice that's seldom ever been achieved. The history of America, in fact, is one of often bitter and painful progress towards achieving that ideal. It was basically ignored for the first few decades after it was written, but Lincoln made it central to his vision. He referred to it often when he was attacking slavery. He revered the Declaration as, quote, a standard maxim for free society, close quote. It was something constantly looked to, constantly labored for, and even though never perfectly attained, constantly approximated, and thereby constantly spreading and deepening its influence and augmenting the happiness and value to all people of all colors everywhere. 100 years later, King's vision was of a country that actually practiced the ideals of the Declaration. Let's think about the Constitution. By the time of the Constitutional Convention in 1787, power had shifted to the moderates. Primary author was Madison, who had to write a document that addressed the situation on the ground and that could actually be ratified. He had radical tendencies, was a strong friend of Jefferson, but he was strongly influenced by Adams and Hamilton, both of whom were squarely in the moderate camp. All were influenced by Montesquieu's principle of balance of powers, which became the basics to the writing of and ultimately the ratification of the Constitution. So these balance of powers, well, he started with the preamble, which is a restatement of the social contract, but then the balance of powers were important because the founders feared the tyranny of both the despot and the mob and had a realistic understanding of human frailties. So it was built around these extensive checks and balances. President was not elected by the people, but by electors selected by the legislatures, a moderate idea. Congress was originally to be the dominant power. It was bicameral with senators selected by state legislatures, again, a moderate idea. But the radicals got their licks in by having the second house elected directly by the people. The executive is responsible for carrying out the will of the Congress, overseeing foreign policy, collecting and dispensing revenues. But Congress controls the money that the executive can spend, and it must approve treaties, wars, and appointments at most of the high levels of the executive. And the Supreme Court, we know, can invalidate laws and handles disputes between states. The Constitution could not have passed the Constitutional Convention without the promise of a Bill of Rights that mostly secured individual freedoms, mostly radical Enlightenment principles. The First Amendment, and to my mind, the most important, has the four freedoms, or five: the freedom of religion, rights of free speech, press, assembly, and petition. Second Amendment rises from the founders' fear of standing army, so it presupposes the state militias whose members at that time would have had to supply their own arms. The Fourth Amendment safeguards private property, basic to both branches of Enlightenment thought. I'm going to skip the others in the interest of time. There was a counter-Enlightenment in America, the Second Great Awakening, from roughly the mid 1790s to the mid 1840s was strongly anti-Enlightenment. Many formerly radical Protestant ministers converted to evangelicalism and urged people to reject the radical Enlightenment ideas that they had earlier advocated. Federalists attacked Democratic candidates as godless atheists. The net result was that after 1800, the entire radical Enlightenment tradition was under general and public condemnation and attack. It influenced the creation of a new founding myth by John Quincy Adams and other moderates in the 1820s. They insisted that the Constitution's essence was the blending of liberty with Bible-based Christianity, thereby creating a new religious mythology of its writing. And he knew that wasn't true because his father was instrumental in writing it. Anyway, but how do you go about building a new government? The founders knew that they were inventing something new based on the best ideas of the time. The new government was designed to accommodate an ongoing series of experiments extending indefinitely into the future. Nobody could anticipate what the results might be, so it was structured to sustain the experimental process itself. The idea was to make it strong and flexible enough to keep cranking out tolerable results in changing times. If you think about it, many of the vexing characteristics of today's liberal democracies became more understandable if their inherent experimental character is recognized. Democracies tend to be untidy, patched up affairs that seldom work out as expected. They stumble around in a fog, slapping together ugly compromises that seem laughably inadequate to the problems at hand. And yet this unappealing system of government, so repellent to the perfectionist in each of us, has proven to be tougher, more resilient, and better able to answer the needs of its citizens than any other. So since then, each side has gained ascendancy at various times. All the expansions of voting rights and increased inclusion of the common people were in times of radical control. Expansion of public education and limits the power of big business were the doings of the radicals. The most sweeping extension, of course, of radical ideas was the granting of the vote to women, over half of our population. The increasing power of the presidency and the Senate, efforts to limit immigration, deregulation of almost everything, and limitations on voting were moderate initiatives. So in conclusion, evidence has taught us that we need both moderate and radical ideas for government to work properly. We need the stability and attention to community that the moderates bring. We need the concern for the rights and needs of individuals espoused by the radicals. And that works out pretty well because most of us are not pure radicals or moderates, but somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, and recognize the important parts of both of these. So I thank you for your time, and I will now turn it back over to Sid.
Thank you, Dr. Reese. I'm going to dip back into baseball parlance in deference to the World Series. Our second presenter might be defined as a middle reliever. And it's a privilege to have with us tonight Lieutenant Colonel retired Joyce Law, who is also a member of the Progressive Religious Coalition of Augusta. She served for 34 years, active duty and a U.S. Army Reserve component from the Vietnam era through aspects of the global war on terrorism. She had specialties of combat communications, medical logistics, and transportation management. She had service as a race relations moderator as well, and she garnered the Department of Defense's Humanitarian Award. This military and civilian award was due for her efforts to help resettle South Vietnamese refugees after the fall of Saigon. Her awards are impressive and many, both in service and in civilian life. And allow me to restate, Colonel Law's award citations and merits are many. At present, she is the CSRA Region Co-Representative of the Georgia African American Historic Preservation Network Board, a certified community emergency team member, volunteer curator for Somerville's 15th Street Cemetery, a historic reenactor and history lecturer, and works for the coroner's office in resolving placement of abandoned veteran headstones. Thank you, Colonel Law, for being with us tonight, and I invite you to share your insights with us at this time.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Are you able to hear me clearly?
Fine.
Okay, great. And so I'm I'm excited and honored to have this opportunity to engage in the forum, to see how past and recent events behoove us to become more familiar with the U.S. Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. So I've been asked to talk about that perspective based on my military experiences. So I went into the military after attending electronics training here at Augusta Technical School, because I thought that was the field the field of the future, you know, with satellite communications and everything. And I was correct. But one of the things that I found out that because I was a woman pioneer, that I had to endure a lot of harassment by the men. I was the only woman in the entire industrial section of Augusta Tech at the time that I went there. You know, so I did not realize, you know, how many barriers I was breaking, you know, when I chose that field. And so I did go into communications in the military, but not things that were more highly technical and mechanical that you would find more men rather than women. But initially, I was really interested in the Marine Corps because I liked their rough and tumble, yet the polished image, you know, very athletic, very adventurous. But when I read in the Leathernet Journal about what the women had to do during basic training, like scrubbing floors with a toothbrush, I said, that wasn't a route for me. I didn't want to do that. So then I checked into the Navy because being adventurous, I went to travel to a lot of exotic locations, but the Army won over because there were far more opportunities for women in the early 1970s in the Army. But the joke was really on me because in basic training, you scrub floors with the toothbrush. Not only that, we learned to paint, how to mow the grass and how to weed, run a floor buffer, how to wash pots and pans and dishes for hundreds of people. So if you've been in the military, it's called KP. You get up like 4 o'clock in the morning and you're there maybe 9 o'clock at night. And doing it one time is enough to say, I never want to see a kitchen again. You know, and it's very inspiring to want you to grow up in rank, so you don't remain in the lower grades, having to do that kind of work. But also too, in 1973, when I entered active duty, women were allowed for the first time to become warrant officer aviation pilots. And that occurred when I was stationed at Fort Gordon in studying data communications. And so my roommate was also a college girl. And so we knew that we would have made the basic qualifications for education. So we went to the recruiter and said that, and well, looking at us like, because we weren't wearing any rank. So like, what do you want? You're already in the Army, so what do you want? so we're interested in the warrant officer aviation program. And he just said, no. And pointed like this. And we were like looking at each other like, what does that mean? He said, glasses. And that was all that was said. So we just turned around and walked away because I mean, okay, you had to have certain amount of vision. You know, if your glasses fell off and you were so high altitude, then what would you do? So it kind of made sense to us. So we didn't feel defeated, but we knew that we wanted to rise in the military, and that was a fresh opening. Okay, so we really didn't think anything of it. We both graduated with honors from our course, which meant that we gained an extra rank. So I already had an extra rank because I went into the program that was called delayed entry. So during that time that I was in technical school, I was also technically in the military. So by the time when I graduated from basic training, I was already a higher grade. And then I graduated at the top 10% of my class in AIT, and I was promoted again. So by the time I got to my first station, instead of being a PV2, I was already a PFC. Yeah. And so because of that, people really kept their eyes on me and watch how I did things. And whenever some opportunity came along, I was just pushed into the upward moving stream, you know, for all kind of different opportunities that we don't have time to go into. But the point that I need to jump to is that in 1973, my roommate and I pursued being a warrant officer, aviation, and the answer was no, wore glasses. However, when I went through the officer basic course as transportation officer in 1979, my classmate, Marcella Hayes, was the first African-American woman to be chosen to go into the aviation program. So it was 6 years between the time that any women were allowed to become aviators to another 6 years before there were any African-American women, you know. And so, you know, and the Army is still considered, you know, the best place for upward mobility for, you know, ethnic minorities. So you can see everything is still like so it's an ongoing challenge, you know, for upward mobility. But this topic from I to we is still very relevant, and for all of the different wonderful reasons that Andy presented to us, these ambitious visions that we have about how a democratic society should look. But the concept of from I to we, for most Americans, I think begins in elementary school when you start to learn the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay. And the Pledge of Allegiance is also a component of Robert's Rules of Order, composed in 1876. Now, I can't remember the last time that I participated in a well-planned meeting that required the recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance following Robert's Rules of Orders, you know, in addition to all of the other parliamentary procedures. Now, it is recited at the Augusta Richmond County full commission, and it's led by someone pre-selected. So I guess they have a chance to review. Okay, now, how do I say this? But one of the interesting connections for Augusta is that Robert's Rule of Order, the composer, was actually the son of the first president of Morehouse College, which started here in Augusta. And so it was originally Augusta Baptist Institute at Springfield Baptist Church, and Reverend Thomas Robert was like the head of the school, and it was his son that composed Robert's Rules of Orders. Now, I was told that he came to Augusta and he saw so much chaos, he had the idea. But for this presentation, I went back to check those facts, and actually it was at a meeting in Massachusetts where he witnessed a lot of chaos, and he decided on his own to develop these parliamentary procedural rules. Yes, he was an engineer by trade, so I guess he's used like putting things into a certain order. And there is another connection, great connection, is from the military and equal opportunity and the promise of the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution about equality, in that John Hope, who becomes Morehouse's first African-American president of Morehouse in 1906 is from Augusta. And his older brother, Madison Newton, was one of the founding members of the Augusta branch of the NAACP in 1917. So Mr. Hope was one of the founding members of the Niagara movement, which evolved into the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. His grandson, Richard Hope, who was a Princeton sociologist, was one of the academic scholars that was chosen to help structure the military's Equal Opportunity Institute in Florida. So can you imagine Augusta having so many connections about how we do things in an orderly, fair way? And my undergraduate study was in political science because my institution at the time did not have the full degree in anthropology. So I had what's called a heavy minor in anthropology. I took all of the courses offered and did really well because that was my first love. But in addition to that, I also studied marketing. I also have degrees in business administration. So just like a very, very long realm. And so one of the opportunities that I was offered as a very young soldier was to attend the racial relation moderator course at the 25th Infantry Division in Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. And during the time that I was in class, and I was the only woman in that particular class. So most of the people there were combat arms. They were artillery and infantry. And there were some support folks there. But they kept hearing these rumblings. We going back to Vietnam. I'm going like, won't be me, it's going to be you. And it turns out that of that class, there were actually two of us that actually wound up getting deployed to Guam for the resettlement. It was one of the cooks and me. Like, go figure. So this was actually the first time, though, that women were actually assigned to the infantry. So I served with Company C of the 1st and the 5th Infantry of the 25th Infantry Division, and that's how I earned the Humanitarian Award. That was actually where the Humanitarian Award was devised, and both civilians and the military can wear that award. So I actually learned more about the U.S. Constitution when I tutored my friends who were studying for citizenship than I ever did in any military course, any political science course. Some things, you study and you study to take the test, and you're glad that it's done. It's probably the most boring courses ever offered was U.S. constitutional history. However, I have very close relatives who were part of the Great Migration from the South that went to the West, went north, Washington, D.C. and New York from the 1920s to the 1940s. So I knew firsthand through my travels about social and political rules that changed at the Mason-Dixon line. And as a child of segregation at about 8 years old, my phone is turned off, but I can still hear it. It's coming through the computer. I'm so sorry. And that's my husband calling me. He knows I'm supposed to be in a meeting right now. Thank you. I'm so sorry. Okay. So based on my own travels firsthand, I knew that the rules, political and the social rules change, at the Mason-Dixon line. But the true meaning of how the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution merged with the amendments and all came into vivid meaning for me when I witnessed the joy on my parents' faces when they voted for the first time without restriction. No poll tax, no reading. Of course, these were educated people, but you know, you had these rules and regulations down south about what you had to, that African Americans had to do that white people didn't in order to vote. And they were just so happy that they didn't have to go through any racial administrative restrictions. But then about 5 years later, I witnessed the 1970 Augusta Riot. And even though I was much older, that I had no knowledge of the governor's authority to activate the state National Guard. That was the first time I actually saw somewhat, you know, an armed soldier. And but when the tanks were rolling at night in our neighborhood, you know, to enforce curfew, that was really like my first impression about how the military can be used other than fighting wars, you know, how they react with everyday citizenry rather than just seeing them in the stores in their uniform. So the oath of office by commissioned officers is conducted way before you see them, like at the West Point or the Naval Academy, when they're tossing their hats, or when they have to give a silver dollar to the first enlisted person that salutes them. And this is what that oath of office says. I, state your name, do solemnly swear or affirm, if you don't swear, that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter. So help me God. And so what's very interesting about that is that we're not really, even though we swear to uphold the Constitution, unless you go to the Naval Academy or the West Point, the Air Force Academy, most military officers are not very well versed what the Constitution says, unless maybe you were a political science or a history major in college. And it's very interesting is that male officers are not required to be college graduates, but women officers are. So the people who are most likely to be affected by constitutional law are folks in combat arms, who are more likely to be what? In the United States Army, they're the men. So the people who really need to know about the Constitution really don't, you know, are less likely to. But what is it that they are more likely to know about, that everyone in the military is, and that we're more likely to be proficient in understanding the rules of the Geneva Convention, how we are to be treated by as prisoners of war, and how we treat other prisoners of war, and then the rules about pillaging and the rules about destruction of cultural heritage that we know very well. And we're also assumed to be very proficient in the tactical rules of engagement, which are composed by a higher headquarters. Like, what is it that you're doing out here on the battlefield? Okay. And so our discernment of what may be a legal or an illegal order stems from the proficiency of the training that we receive as individual soldiers, and also collectively in our units. The training is ongoing, so that we don't have to think twice. American soldiers are very well trained in what they do. So I want to ask you, and this, I know we have dialogue later, ask you this question, think about it. Who remembers Tom Hanks in the film Saving Private Ryan when he devises a sticky bomb? Do you remember that? Okay. And so what does the sergeant ask him? He says, where is that in the Ranger manual? Okay. Because Rangers and Special Forces communicate through signals, right? They know their manuals in and out so well that they don't have to actually speak to each other. They can anticipate what the other is going to do because they know they know this manual in and out, And they definitely know the tactical rules of engagement and what their mission is. But the general public is more likely to hear about cases of crimes against humanity, such as the My Lai massacre during the Vietnam era. So that's when we get into what is constitutional. At the conclusion of the US Civil War, there was only one officer that was executed for murder, despite many other acts that were heinous acts that were committed by folks such as Bedford Forrest, having committed offenses not aligned with the traditional conduct of prisoners. But here's a point of irony in that President Lincoln authorized only a non-voting representative to attend the First Geneva Convention in 1863. Can anyone surmise why he would do that? Well, neutrality is the key point of assistance to the sick and the wounded on the battlefield. And so joining the International Red Cross would mean greater reconstitution of the Confederate forces if they receive help from anyone from any other countries that would come into the United States to give aid under the banner of the International Red Cross. And so, but the supposition backfired because Union troops were in the blockaded South and the Confederate troops were in the better resourced northern prison facilities. Okay. And so it was not until 1982 that the United States ratified the Geneva Convention and we could form the American Red Cross. So luckily, Clara Barton, who was called the Angel of the Battlefield, lived to see the enactment and served as the president of the American Red Cross from 1881 to 1904, resigning at the age of 83. So why is the Red Cross so important in the United States? Well, civilian resources are the mainstay of domestic support. British quartering in American homes during the colonial era became a rallying point for inclusion of a provision in the Constitution, no quartering of soldiers, okay? So our state governors have the control of the state militia known as the National Guard. And all 50 states have them in addition to our territories, okay? And so Puerto Rico is aligned with the Georgia National Guard. And the National Guard members receive the same military occupational certification as their active duty counterparts. And so one particular case where the US Constitution and the Declaration come into focus is when the Little Rock, Arkansas mayor's request to President Eisenhower for federalization of the Arkansas National Guard and the mobilization of the 101st Airborne, minus the Black paratroopers, for the protection of the Little Rock 9 for the integration of Central High School in Little Rock. Okay, so my personal experience with that kind of request was when I sat at the logistics desk at headquarters First Army, and my responsibility was the communication between the state governor's request and the president to declare a federal emergency or for some other type of assistance. And there's a very specific phrasing that goes up and comes back down, but it's been so many years ago, I don't remember what it is. But the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878 has seeped more into more recent news broadcasts last year because of the social justice protest. And that is when the president is allowed to use federal troops on domestic soil to either suppress a rebellion or to enforce federal civil rights, as the example of the Little Rock, Arkansas events. There have been only 22 counts of treason that have been indicted in the United States. So it's very rare that military officers in the United States are charged with treason. Now, Leavenworth and other military prisons, they have all kind of other offenses, but it's really very rare, treason. And usually other people, civilians committing treasons, it's usually during time of war. But so these are aligned with more wartime conduct. But with the growing instances of cyber crimes in our global society, where so much activity is interwoven, treason may come more of a frequent charge. We might come to see that a little bit more often. For me, personally, being very adventurous, I've had to come with some creative solutions, sometimes in the field or administrative operations. But the one time that I came close to really getting into trouble was during the Second Gulf War. And my son was in the lead invasion into Iraq. He served with the headquarters of the 3rd Infantry Division. And we got word back that the soldiers were using their toothbrushes to clean their weapons. They were in the desert with 1 liter of water per day because of some very poor logistical decisions. So I, with a mother's heart, compiled some protest poetry. I published it in the form of a book. It's called Too Far Away, Too Long, dedicated to my son and the allies. But it was written directly to President Bush, mailed to him. I got a very nice response back from him. But I was praying very desperately that I did not receive any retribution. And I did not. And it was very clear that I was in the military, but President Bush just took it to heart and wrote, as a matter of fact, Laura Bush was having surgery. And while he was away in France, we heard it on the news. He wrote her a poem. And that way, before he answered me in the form of a presidential letter, I knew he had read the book, because who ever heard of George Bush writing poetry? So most of my work in equal opportunity has been for either processing grievances or also ensuring inclusion. And so, as I said before, upward mobility and inclusion is still, it's an ongoing challenge that we have, even though we have this wonderful democratic society. A lot of my assignments took me to work in the Pentagon, but when it comes to deciding whether or not something is constitutional, that is talked about like at the table with the president. So all of those issues are usually settled before orders go out to the lower commands.
Colonel Law, thank you so much for that very detailed description of your personal sojourns with the military and tapping into germane concerns having to do with the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Batting cleanup for us tonight, to dip into baseball parlance one more time, is Dr. Aza El-Remesi. She was graduated as a pharmacist from Mansour University in Egypt. She came to the United States as a graduate exchange student in 1996 to the Medical College of Georgia. She received her PhD in 1999 and continued her postdoctoral training at MCG. She held a professorship there from 2006 to 2016 and was director of the graduate program at the UGA College of Pharmacy, Augusta campus. She currently is a clinical pharmacist at Doctors Hospital. For over 25 years, Dr. El-Remesi, as she has to be called Aza, has been involved with the Islamic Society of Augusta as a teacher, executive committee member, and as an active member of interfaith efforts at ISA. She has received interfaith training and is co-founder of the CSRA Women Interfaith Network. She also is the Interfaith Fellowship of Augusta membership officer. Home is Martinez, Georgia, where she lives with her husband, Muhammad, and twin boys, Kareem and Ibrahim. Dr. El-Remesi, we appreciate and greatly anticipate your words to us tonight. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction. I am really delighted to have the opportunity. I've been, as you mentioned, I've been active in interfaith activities. But I hope I'm going to be up to the rise to the occasion tonight with after these two great speakers. Mine going to be on the lighter side, more of the entertaining, really sort of like looking into my personal journey of how I see myself as professional Muslim Egyptian American woman. That I kind of like that's kind of how I'd like to share that perspective. And I am not, oh, I can share my screen. I can see that. All right, and let's see if I can. All right, you can see my screen, right?
Yes, nice.
Yeah, very good. So I am going also with the theme of tonight, going from the I to we, and how we can heal, our division. And as I said, I'm gonna take it as more of a personal perspective, and hopefully we can make some good points for discussion through that personal journey. So I am originally from a small city called Mansoura, and it's sees the Nile. And I really, as I said, my personal view of that is I'd like to share my journey from Mansoura, Egypt to Augusta, Georgia. And it's a journey of growth over the past 25 years. So to the left, you can see my home city where I grew up and spent my first 25 years of life. This is the Nile, and this is a famous bridge in my home city that crossed that Nile. And then coming to Augusta, where I spent another 25 years here. And you can see also the Savannah River and the Great Bridge that when I first arrived and they took me, to that place, I felt immediately home. I just made the bond and I said, I love Augusta. And sure you can, tell that, there is lots of similarities, even though you have, thousands and thousands of miles away from these two places. So, quickly as, Sid mentioned, I graduated from pharmacy school. I am the youngest for two, for a family that I have two brothers older than me. I was very dedicated, good girl studying. And I came first in class. So I had the master in 1995. Then I got a scholarship in 96. And this is to the right here is my university. That's Mansoura University. And to the left, that's my home city. If you look from the airplane, that's kind of, how it looks. And this is the Nile and the same bridge that I showed you earlier. So, here you can think, back, kind of putting my brain along with my family and my professors, thinking I got that scholarship that would allow me to go and study. The option at that time was the USA, Germany, and Japan. And the choice came for USA, for a single young girl, to leave her family and come across half of the world to continue studying. And I was coming to study molecular biology because at that time, that was the hot fashion, like to do cloning and gene editing and all that cool stuff, yeah. So we had, as I said, that was not an easy decision, but we went back and forth. And then, so I'd like to share with you some of the thoughts about why did we end up choosing the United States. So the US, even at that time and still perceived as the big melting pot, it accepts everybody from every culture. One of my professors who said, oh, you're not going to be foreign there because everybody come from somewhere else. So you're not going to be alienated, if, similar. They speak English. So you can, that will be an easy transition, for you compared to learning Deutsch or Japanese or, yeah. So that was kind of like in the pros, Among the cons was, oh, it's a big melting pot. Do not lose your identity. Do not lose who you are. And, kind of like take the benefit of being in the melting pot, but try to keep your identity. And as I said, that was kind of like really the discussion. Is it going to be a melting pot, or is it going to be the salad ball? And I'd like to share with you some additional stories, trying to show, and that's what I do now with my kids, that United States is really, is also what you make it. Are we going to be melted together in that melting pot, or are we going to be staying together, each keep their identity, but together we are that wonderful salad ball? Like, like you keep your identity, but together we are making one unique, wonderful gathering there. So that was kind of my life, really. Arriving to the Augusta back in '96, I was very involved with the international club. That MCG paper, and I'm sure Dr. Reese would remember that. That was like our weekly, we get information about the yard sales, about any coupons for food. As a typical graduate student, that was kind of like, the go-to. I was in the Duga building, not even in the main part in the research building. That's with the, ophthalmology. And that's where I spend lots and lots of hours. I mean, doing basic research, can take all your day and night. But the balance also came by having, and very fortunate to be in a city with the size of Augusta, to have already an Islamic center. Like, this is where I go to worship, meet, people that, provided spiritual support, language support, moral support, that kind of like balance it. So I think the balance is one of the key things that can make, different people thrive in that environment. Being really mostly in research and in academia throughout the next years, I think that was one of the main reasons that helped me thrive, and as I said, maintain my identity. This is just an example. This was, as a postdoc, I was in the vascular biology center. And that was kind of like, if you look carefully in that picture, you're gonna see lots of, ethnicity background. So I was one of the postdoc of 22 postdocs. One of them was white American, one of them was Afro-American, and then you name it. I was from Egypt, we had people from Morocco, Argentina, Greece, Italy, Russia, Romania, Hungary, India, China, Armenia, Venezuela. So you name it. So every day, really, between work and like even lunch, our lunch break room was like the international club. Just you meet people from different, different places, different ethnicity, different religious background, different native tongues. I mean, all of us, English is our second language. And that, was great support in itself. It was, a chance really for all of us to exchange ideas, thoughts, and many times we would be laughing, telling stories about like growing up, or stories from our childhood, or with our spouses, and then we kind of continue the story, or if you finish the story for each other. So, that really taught us that we are so similar, although on the outside we look absolutely different. Everybody comes from, as I said, different continents, not even to mention different countries. And we are all together, as I said, in the melting pot or in the salad ball, working and learning and thriving, and trying really to be part of this great country and maintain, who we are and, who we came, from. I'm going to shift a little bit and talk about the bias. So a good question would be, like, in this big group and this big mix, was it always a happy time? The answer was yes. Most of the time we had really happy time. Did we get, moments, dark moments, if I can say, that you would feel that you're different, or that's not your place, or why you're here? definitely it passed, every one of us, we went through that. And when you step back and kind of look into it, all of us, everyone as human, we experience the unconscious bias, all of us. And it comes in different shapes and different forms. And whether it's really unconscious or, ingrained, that we are very conscious and aware about it. Usually we experience that and it tends to come out when we are under stress. So I do remember very clearly that when I first came to the state, as a graduate student, I lived in the library. I lived in the library in MCG because it was air conditioned, it was free. We used to sit and study until it used to close at midnight. So they had to kick us out from the library so we can go home, and then now we have to turn on our own air condition, right? To save few pennies from the bill. But I always had sweet ladies helping us around, to navigate our way around the books or textbooks or, other things. But they have never met a Muslim. They have never met somebody like myself with the head cover. They thought that I am a cancer patient who lost my hair, so that's the reason I cover my hair. So one time in the restroom, I was freshening up. It was so hot, and I was like, making my wash to get ready for prayer, and the lady looked at me with a big eye, and she said, "You have hair?" I did not know that. Just like, yeah. Fast forward, when September 11 happened, of course, how dramatic and tragedy that was for everybody. One of the positive thing, if I may say something positive, happened out of it is the huge enlightening about Muslim and Islam, not necessarily in a good way, but after September 11, everybody knew what it is. Like, it's not that I'm cancer patient. It means that I'm Muslim and I'm covered, yeah. So that was kind of like, yeah. And of course, also it was a major landmark for us as Muslims being under the spot and, kind of being, questioned all the time on our religion and our belief and, why we're here and what we do and all of that. In fact, it was almost a constant question after I do a seminar presentation, a poster presentation in a scientific meeting. It has nothing to do with this. Then you get somebody always waiting and say, "Can I ask a question that has nothing to do with science?" And I always say, "Yes, please go ahead." And the question almost like 99%. "So what did that thing on your head? What did this mean?" Or something related to the, marriage in Islam, you name it, something related. Yeah. So definitely, as I said, it made it as introduction to start, lots of conversation. Mostly they were friendly. Sometimes, you get those fiery points of having already a conscious bias against, being Muslim in the state. Yeah. But now I'm going to shift gear again, and let's talk really about that hidden bias. So I love that quote. So we really don't see things as they are. We see them as we are. So really your own perception add to the fact. And sometimes the perception is stronger than facts. And as I said, I will kind of like, switch gear here to like to talk about the bias from my own perspective. How did I see things? And how did I prepare myself to be seen, knowing that you look at me, and definitely I'm not from Augusta, Georgia. I came to Augusta, Georgia from somewhere else, yeah. So, as I said, growing up as a Muslim, and I come from an average Muslim family. Like, we're not a super strict, if we can say that. We are not also liberal, kind of like, as I said, we're average Muslim family, middle class in Egypt, yeah. So this is a verse from the Quran that, and I included both the Arabic, version and the English version. I grew up and kind of really got lived that meaning here, that we are meant to be different. When God created humans, if he wanted us to be exactly the same thing, he would have easily created us the same way. same look, same color, same height, same language. But he meant for us to be different. And the main reason is for us to get to know each other and get acquainted with each other and to be able to live with each other. So this is one basic, or fundamental concept as Muslim. And as I said, I lived that concept here in the state, and I kind of like really, I try to advocate for my students and my coworkers, my family, that we are meant to be different. We were not meant to be exactly the same thing, and being different gonna take lots of responsibility to be able to work and live together. The other concept, that big concept also that kind of, shaped my own conscious, and also I try to kind of like, to see that in others, is the equality. So Prophet Muhammad, that's our last messenger, and that we believe that he is the last holder of the God messages. In a narration, or in one of his quotes, that, "O mankind, your Lord is one, and you came from one. You are all one. You descended from Adam, and Adam was created from earth. The best among you in the sight of God is the most upright. No Arab is superior than non-Arab. No colored person is superior than to a white person. No white person is superior to a colored person. We are kind of like differentiated, or if we can be having different differences, it's going to be among based on how much we are God conscious. That equality, again, it's one of the fundamental philosophy for us as Muslim, and that's something you need to see also, kind of, because sometimes you see ideal concepts that is hard really to see it in reality or to live through, and so we do, that's one of the things that we keep reminding ourselves, that at the end of the day, we are all children of God, and at the end of the day, no one is better than the other. You might have more resources, but then you would have more responsibilities that come with that, with that more resources. Yeah. All right, so that, and I'm borrowing this from one of the places that, from the cultural training that I went to, for the Islamic leadership program, that how really to achieve that assimilation without loss of identity. And I think now recently they have more, I want to call it more sophisticated, expression. So they call this acculturation. Which is basically the process by which an individual or a group adopt the practice and value of one culture while still remaining their own culture of origin. And, I really feel that as society here in the state, we are doing that. We have, I think that's still exemplary for the rest of, the Western world, at least I can say that you can be American and you enjoy your, Spanish heritage or Arabic heritage, or being a Muslim or being a Hindu, and you still can be a full American citizen. That is nothing, kind of like, it's not contradictory to have both. Yeah. So there, and we need also to realize that it's a two-way process. So the majority culture will adopt also elements of those minority cultures. And as I said, being as American citizen myself, over the past 10 years, and being here in this great society for the past 25 years, I think we have some fails, definitely, but the majority really, I really see it as positive and bright, and constantly working and striving to keep keep moving forward of accommodating and going really for that, to be the real thing that, people can, you still can enjoy having an India Day, Mexico Day, Egypt Day, and so forth. And still that didn't make you less American than anyone else. All right. I also want to talk about another one of our fundamentals. And, if you allow me to introduce, so Prophet Muhammad, as I said, we believe he is the seal of the prophets as Muslim. And when, there is kind of like so many ways kind of like to identify him or introduce him. But this is really one of my favorites. So he introduced himself that I was sent to complete or to perfect the noble manners. So, as Muslim, we believe in all the prophets, starting from Adam, or, going through Abraham, Noah, Moses, Jesus, John, we have more than 25 names mentioned, in the Quran. We believe that Prophet Muhammad is the seal of them, or the last one. So the example, we think that all the prophets and all the previous messages is like a wall that had like a missing brick. And then he came to perfect that brick, by, as I said, by perfecting the noble manners. So being really a good Muslim is really about having good morals and good ethics and good belief. And not only believing them just in our heart and in our mind, but internalizing this and trying your best to make this your daily behavior. That's really what kind of like, then you can really claim that I'm a good Muslim, I'm practicing, Muslim. And with that, I just want to again give you that's kind of my view. I was not trying to think, So I'd like to share some of the Islamic values and compare this to the American values and see if, this gonna be, are we doing that assimilation or are we doing contradiction? So as a Muslim, we are required to work hard, make the best of our day, smile at others, take care of your family, be kind to your neighbors, be truthful and be faithful, respect others, including boundaries and their rights, be kind to the environment. That's a very Muslim thing. If you look in there and compare this to the American value, it's not going to be hard to see a check value, a check box that we are checking lots of boxes, together. So it kind of hurt me sometimes that people will say, oh, how do you live? Do you still Muslim? Or, can you practice? Or how do you see the contradiction? And I don't see a contradiction. I see lots of alignment really between the Islamic values and American values that make me live every day, as I said, as a full day between being a work and a mom and activist in the community. Finally, that's going to be my last one. I'd like really for you to know, you might already have, about this website. This is the Islamic Bureau website in Atlanta. And that's what I got also, as I said, some of my training. Their goal is really building bridges, one interaction at the time. This is the leader, the furious, the fearless leader, Sumaya Khalifa. And most recently, they had lots of initiative really to kind of highlight Muslims who live in Georgia. They had the 100 influential Georgia Muslims. They have the 40 under 40. And if you go to this website, and I'm not sure, I'm not checking the time, if you go to these websites, you will see what I'm talking about in terms of, highlighting the some of the activities here. So let me, if you allow me here, and okay, let me share the screen. So this is from their website. And this is, for example, this was the 40 under 40. And just going through the, the examples that you can see here, that you can see that people working on, either in academia, in seminary, in healthcare, in a law firm, in rehab, in the public, offices, as I said, in Homeland Security investigation, in immigration lawyers. You can find medical, entrepreneur. I think Aisha Yaqub also, she ran for, she was the founder for the Georgia Muslim Voter Project, and she ran as a Gwinnett representative. So just kind of, examples about the being part of the actual society, living or striving really to get into the, being equal, being actively participating and still maintaining your identity. And also, I'd like just to highlight the fact itself that the ISP is, kind of looking for people who are building into their community. So we don't want somebody just like to sit, in actively worship, like let's say, but then they really is not part of the community itself, and like kind of like to advance that community, because that's the golden stone for for all of us, like to, as I said, to be active, to be actively participating, and to continue, as I said, it's a striving to continue to remain who you are, and very proud of your heritage, and still make the dream to be part of the American culture. So that's what I got, and I'll be happy to entertain any questions or hear from the rest of our great panelists.
Okay, well, I would like to thank the panelists for their robust conversation, their insights derived from personal experience, training, academe. We have ballooned past our time, and we are not going to have time tonight for Q&A. I get that from the cloud and our director, but it was hard to cut anybody off because you all were just wonderfully detailed and really presented some information tonight, each and every one of you. That was a gift to all of us, but we will have to go ahead and end our program tonight. For those of you watching that may have a question, you can certainly write them to our Progressive Religious Coalition website.
Sid, we've got until 9 o'clock. So we've got a few more minutes.
I just heard from our director that we need to, if you want to handle this, Andy, go right ahead.
No, I just thought that we had a little bit more time.
Yeah, well, we were going to try to get the Q&A going at 8:30. But again, it was wonderful conversation. I don't have a problem if, Gregory, you're still on, correct?
We have no questions from the audience at this time. So, so there's no questions to be had. So
yeah,
that's why I said we cut it off here at 8:50. So, but go ahead, Sid.
Well, no, I thank you for Gregory giving us that perspective. And he and I had some conversation going with our audience and the numbers and where we were with some things. So wanted to let everybody speak and have requisite time to do that. But it would be Q&A amongst ourselves, which some of you may have a need to do. I'm going to go ahead and bid you adieu and go watch the World Series. But it has been a wonderfully positive experience for me. And I thank each and every one of you for your preparation, your time, and your gifts of wisdom to us all.
Thanks, Sid.
Thank you, Sid.
Thank you very much. You did a great job for us tonight.